and though no insult was meant, I would still beg your father's forgiveness." It was Keenaglass's turn to seem bemused. Then he shrugged as though he was not certain he was making the right decision, but at last he gestured towards his shield wall. Arthur stood, and, side by side with the prince, went to see the dying King Gorfyrthid. I wanted to call out to Arthur not to go, but he was swallowed in the enemy's ranks before my muddled wits recovered. I cringed to think what Gorfyrthid would say to Arthur, and I knew Gorfyrthid would say those things, the same filthy things that he had spat at me across the rim of his spear-scarred shield. King Gorfyrthid was not a man to forgive his enemies, nor one to spare an enemy hurt, even if he was dying, especially if he was dying. It would be Gorfyrthid's final pleasure in this world to know that he had hurt his foe. Sagramore shared my fears, and both of us watched in anguish as, after a few moments, Arthur emerged from the defeated ranks with a face as dark as Cruachan's cave. Sagramore stepped towards him. "He lied, Lord," Sagramore said softly. "He always lied." "I know he lied," Arthur said, then shuddered. "But some untruths are hard to hear, and impossible to forgive." Anger suddenly swelled up inside him, and he drew Excalibur and turned fiercely on the trapped enemy. "Does any man of you want to fight for your king's lies?" he shouted as he paced up and down their line. "Is there one of you, just one man willing to fight for that evil thing that dies with you? Just one! Or else I'll have your king's soul cursed to the last darkness. Come on! Fight!" He flailed Excalibur at their raised shields. "Fight, you scum!" His rage was as terrible as anything the Vale had seen that whole day. "In the name of the gods," he called, "I declare your king a liar, a bastard, a thing without honor, a nothing." He spat at them, then fumbled one-handed at the buckles of my leather breastplate that he still wore. He succeeded in freeing the shoulder straps, but not the waist, so that the breastplate hung in front of him like a blacksmith's apron. "I'll make it easy for you," he yelled. "No armor, no shield. Come and fight me. Prove to me that your bastard whoremongering king speaks truth. Not one of you?" His rage was out of control, for he was in the gods' hands now, and spattering his anger at a world that cowered from his dreadful force. He spat again. "You rancid horse!" He whirled around as Keenaglass reappeared in the shield wall. "You whelp!" He pointed Excalibur at Keenaglass. "You'd fight for that lump of dying filth!" Keenaglass, like every man there, was shaken by Arthur's fury. But he walked weaponless from the shield wall, and then, just feet from Arthur, he sank to his knees. "We are at your mercy, Lord Arthur," he said, and Arthur stared at him. His body was tense, for all the rage and frustration of a day's fighting was boiling inside him, and for a second I thought that Excalibur would hiss in the dusk to strike Keenaglass's head from his shoulders. But then Keenaglass looked up. "I am now king of Powys, Lord Arthur, but at your mercy." Arthur closed his eyes. Then, still with his eyes shut, he felt for Excalibur's scabbard and thrust the long sword home. He turned away from Keenaglass, opened his eyes and stared at us, his spearmen, and I saw the madness pass away from him. He was still seething with anger, but the uncontrollable rage had passed, and his voice was calm as he begged Keenaglass to stand. Then Arthur summoned his banner-holders so that the twin standards of the dragon and the bear would add dignity to his words. "My terms are these," he said, so that everyone in the darkening vale could hear him. "I demand King Gundlius' head. He has kept it too long, and the murderer of my king's mother must be brought to justice. That granted, I ask only for peace between King Keenaglass and my king, and between King Keenaglass and King Teudric. I ask for peace between all Britons." There was an astonished silence. Arthur was the winner on this field. His forces had killed the enemy's king and captured Powys' heir, and every man in the Vale expected Arthur to demand a royal ransom for Keenaglas's life. Instead, he was asking for nothing but peace. Keenaglas frowned. "What of my throne?" he managed to ask. "Your throne is yours, Lord King," Arthur said. "Whose else can it be? Accept my terms, Lord King, and you are free to return to it." "And Gundlius's throne?" Keenaglas asked, perhaps suspecting that Arthur wanted Siluria for himself. "Is not yours," Arthur replied firmly. "Nor mine. Together we shall find someone to keep it warm. Once Gundlius is dead," he added ominously. "Where is he?" Keenaglas gestured towards the village. "In one of the buildings, Lord." Arthur turned towards Powys' defeated spearmen and raised his voice so that each man could hear him. "This war should never have been fought," he called. "That it was fought is my fault, and I accept that fault and shall pay for it in any coin other than my life. To the Princess Cynwyn I owe more than apology, and shall pay whatever she demands. But all I now ask is that we should be allies. New Saxons come daily to take our land and enslave our women. We should fight them, not amongst ourselves. I ask for your friendship, and as a token of that desire I leave you your land, your weapons, and your gold. This is neither victory nor defeat." He gestured at the bloody, smoke-palled valley. "It is a peace. All I ask is peace and one life. That of Gundlius." He looked back to Keenaglas and lowered his voice. "I wait your decision, Lord King." The druid Eorwith hurried to Keenaglas's side, and the two men spoke together. Neither seemed to believe Arthur's offer, for warlords were not usually magnanimous in victory. Battle winners demanded ransom, gold, slaves, and land. Arthur wanted only friendship. "What of Gwent?" Keenaglas asked Arthur. "What will Tudrik want?" Arthur made a show of looking about the darkening valley. "I see no men of Gwent, Lord King. If a man is not party to a fight, then he cannot be party to the settlement afterward. But I can tell you, Lord King, that Gwent craves for peace. King Tudrik will ask for nothing except your friendship, and the friendship of my king. A friendship we shall mutually pledge never to break." "And I am free to go, if I give you that pledge?" Keenaglas asked suspiciously. "Wherever you wish, Lord King. Though I ask your permission to come to you at Caer Seuss to talk further." "And my men are free to go?" Keenaglas asked. "With their weapons, their gold, their lives, and my friendship," Arthur answered. He was at his most earnest, desperate to ensure that this was the last battle ever to be fought among the Britons, though he had taken good care, I noticed, to mention nothing of Rattay. That surprise could wait. Keenaglas still seemed to find the offer too good to be true, but then, perhaps remembering his former friendship with Arthur, he smiled. "You shall have your peace, Lord Arthur." "On one last condition," Arthur said unexpectedly and harshly, yet not loudly, so that only a few of us could hear his words. Keenaglas looked wary, but waited. "Promise me, Lord King," Arthur said, "upon your oath and upon your honour, that at his death your father lied to me." Peace hung on Keenaglas's answer. He momentarily closed his eyes as though he was hurt. Then he spoke. "My father never cared for truth, Lord Arthur, but only for those words that would achieve his ambitions. My father was a liar, upon my oath." "Then we have peace!" Arthur exclaimed. I had only seen him happier once, and that was when he had wed his Guinevere. But now, amidst the smoke and reek of a battle won, he looked almost as joyful as he had in that flowered glade beside the river. Indeed, he could hardly speak for joy, for he had gained what he wanted more than anything in the world. He had made peace. Messengers went north and south, to Chersoos and to Durnovaria, to Magnis and into Siluria. Lug Vales stank of blood and smoke. Many of the wounded were dying where they had fallen, and their cries were pitiful in the night, while the living huddled round fires and talked of wolves coming from the hills to feast on the battle's dead. Arthur seemed almost bewildered by the size of his victory. He was now, though he could scarcely comprehend it, the effective ruler of southern Britain, for there were no other men who would dare stand against his army, battered though it was. He needed to talk with Tudric. He needed to send spearmen back to the Saxon frontier. He desperately wanted his good news to reach Guinevere. And all the while, men begged him for favours and land, for gold and rank. Merlin was telling him about the cauldron. Keenaglas wanted to discuss Ael's Saxons, while Arthur wanted to talk of Lancelot and Kynwyn, and Oengus mac Hiram was demanding land, women, gold, and slaves from Siluria. I demanded only one thing on that night, and that one thing Arthur granted me. He gave me Gundlius. The king of Siluria had taken refuge in a small Roman-built temple that was attached to the larger Roman house in the small village. The temple was made of stone, and had no windows except for a crude hole set into its high gable to let smoke out, and only one door which opened onto the house's stable-yard. Gundlius had tried to escape from the Vale, but his horse had been cut down by one of Arthur's horsemen, and now, like a rat in its last hole, the king waited his doom. A handful of loyal Silurian spearmen guarded the temple door, but they deserted when they saw my warriors advance out of the dark. Tanabers alone was left to guard the firelit temple, where he had made a small ghost fence by placing 2 newly severed heads at the foot of the door's twin posts. He saw our spearheads glitter in the stable-yard gate, and he raised his moon-tipped staff as he spat curses at us. He was calling on the gods to shrivel our souls, when, quite suddenly, his screeching stopped. It stopped when he heard Howlbane scraping from her scabbard. At that sound, he peered into the dark yard as Nimue and I advanced together, and, recognizing me, he gave a small frightened cry like the sound of a hare trapped by a wildcat. He knew that I owned his soul, and so he scuttled in terror through the temple door. Nimue kicked the 2 heads scornfully aside, then followed me inside. She was carrying a sword. My men waited outside. The temple had once been dedicated to some Roman god, though now it was the British gods for whom the skulls were stacked so high against its bare stone walls. The skull's dark eye sockets gazed blankly towards the twin fires that lit the high, narrow chamber, where Tanabers had made himself a circle of power with a ring of yellowing skulls. He now stood in that circle chanting spells, while behind him, against the far wall where a low stone altar was stained black with sacrificial blood, Gundlius waited with his drawn sword. Tanabers, his embroidered robe spattered with mud and blood, raised his staff and hurled foul curses at me. He cursed me by water and by fire, by earth and by air, by stone and by flesh, by dewfall and by moonlight, by life and by death. And not one of the curses stopped me, as I slowly walked towards him, with Nimue in her stained white robe beside me. Tanabers spat a final curse, then pointed the staff straight at my face,